Oh, hello there. So, this is Salgood Sam, and this is a first. I'm going to make a little short announcement here. This is for the next C list on Sequential. I'm going to collect as much as I can find for the last 2 weeks since the last time I did a C list. I think it's about been 2 weeks. All the news I can find about Canadian comics stuff going on right now during lockdown and everything. Something we've been doing on Sequential for a long time, intermittently. I used to do it really regularly, and then, like a lot of my blogging, I kind of got irregular about it. Sequential is a comics news site that focuses on CanCon comics content. Not to be nationalistic, but we're next to a very large market with the U.S., and it's hard for Canadian creators, especially indie creators, to stand out. So Sequential was always designed to just be a way to curate, and originally it was kind of a link blog, a meta blog. But we've gotten a little more into posting some articles of our own, and the C list, which has been a huge curated link dump and lots of embedded media and comics and cartoons from Canadian creators. We occasionally have articles and pieces. Brian Munn has been, I think, definitely the longest other contributor than me. I founded the site back in 2002. It was actually a spin-off of the Montreal Comic Jams, which is something else I'll be talking about soon on YouTube. So stay tuned. And Sequential was it was a couple of reasons behind it. Initially, I did it because I just needed to write more. I'm dyslexic and I need to practice the actual mechanics of writing to be a better writer. And so I started blogging. And I was doing a comic jam, and I had a place to talk about stuff on the comics blog that would remind people, the jam blog, remind people about next jam. I started posting information about Canadian comics. And then right around the same time that Journalista was happening, that's the Comics Journal's original comics blog. And I saw how they were curating stuff and went, oh, that's the way to do it. And I sort of adopted some of their patterns and practices, and that helped kind of focus my what I was doing with the blog, so I didn't make it too much work, mostly just looking through and trying to collect information and then share it in short form, little abbreviated captions, and here's a link. We have since gone and expanded. So I mentioned Brian. He used to do best-selling lists, and he still does occasionally research op-eds and little historical anecdotes about comics of yore and things going on today. He's Guelph-based. I'm here in Montreal. Also in Montreal, we've recently joined forces with Brendan Montgomery, and Brendan publishes Sequential Magazine, which is a physical and digital download comics magazine. And it focuses on indie comics as well. There is a little bit of a bias more towards sort of serialized adventure comics in that, but they've done a really cool job kind of covering the ground and checking out other stuff too, and trying to be forward-thinking and really inclusive in their coverage. That's always been an agenda for me for comics in Canada right away. Creators away from the mainstream, the American, have a hard time making a go of it, so the whole market is a little bit fringe in a way, or it has been anyway historically. And then within that, of course, there are communities that have a hard time being seen and getting a voice. So my dream was always to have like at least one reporter in every major Canadian city entering blog posts about what's going on in their town. And then definitely things like studio visits and tours of local book shows and gallery shows and events and signings and stuff like that, and just sort of stay on top of it. In the end, we've had a cadre of people come through to contribute to the blog, but it's never been quite that complete. I've never gotten the end-to-end Canada coverage I'd like to do. I'm still up for that, but social media makes it a little easy for me to at least curate and collect information from other Canadian creators and share that myself. Even if I can't have people literally in all those places, I can kind of virtually reach out. So I'm doing this video just before I go off and spend a couple hours trying to check out what's been happening in the last 2 weeks in Canadian comics, collect the most interesting stuff of that, a bunch of comics to embed, maybe some videos, some other things, and then make a big post on sequentialpop. I think I got both. Wait a minute. I was just going to check myself because I'm having one of those senior moments. .ca. Sequentialpulp.ca. I do think I bought org too. I can't remember now. I think I registered org just in case. But I wanted CA because we're a Canadian comic site, and it will be a big blog about all of Canadian comics. Some of what I'm doing too, but a lot of other people. Also, part of the reason I'm doing this video, just been talking over the last couple of days with Brendan, Sam Noir, who's a regular contributor to our Facebook page. If you want to get a really much more like rapid, up-to-date, current pulse of the Canadian comic scene, there's about 4 or 5 of us that intermittently share links to the Facebook page. So that would be, let me get you that full and accurate URL before I make a foolish mistake. Like not having had this ready before I started recording. Facebook. Sequential. So facebook.com/sequential.org. .org. I'm pretty sure I also registered the URL. But yeah. And so we'll probably try to rope those guys into this. Definitely Sam. So Sam, who's a regular contributor to the Facebook page, and me have been cracking a scheme to do a podcast, which is starting to look like a vodcast, in that we'll use Zoom and record it and post it to YouTube. I've just started a sequential YouTube channel, which this is going to be the first post on, and we'll start posting those. For now, we're just toying around with something silly like the Sequential COVID podcast or Lockdown podcast or something like that. But before this all happened, it was just going to be the Sequential podcast, and it'll be kind of free form. Initially, I was thinking a tight half hour or less, but I suspect, knowing, just having a couple initial conversations with me and Sam, they might go on to an hour sometimes. We tend to be verbose. Hopefully you enjoy that. You can always tune out if you get bored. We'll try to keep things punchy at the beginning, get all the headline news in, and we'll bring Brendan in to talk about his beats, the kind of scenes that he's covering. So much more the fandom convention scene, indie publishers who are trying to make a go of it in the direct market, and sort of pamphlet comics. Also some, Sam and I both have a wish list of creators we want to bring in and interview, kind of KFAB style, and generally try to make some fun with these tools, and get a little closer to that dream of having a portal with Sequential that gives people a window on what's happening in Canada with comics. And in case you're wondering, who's this guy? I'm Salgood Sam. Actually, Max Douglas Salgood Sam's my name backwards. It's a long story. I'm a comic creator. I'm based out of Montreal, as I mentioned earlier on. And I founded Sequential because I thought it would be nice to do that. And it would give me, as I mentioned earlier, the blog thing kind of gave me an excuse. But I also really felt like I came into the business as a professional in the 90s. I got my first job in like 91. And I technically did some stuff before that too, but that was like my first pro job at Marvel when I was 21, 22. Actually, 20, 21, I should say. And then that was cool, but it wasn't the experience I was looking for, and it quickly turned into not so cool and not something I wanted to be doing. And when I kind of backed up and thought about what I wanted to do as a comic creator, and I pretty much pursued that with my career, but I recognized early on one of the big obstacles is that it's difficult to have visibility in the North American market as a Canadian creator. It's like 30 million versus 300 million population difference. And that transfers everything else. We once did a while back, Brian collected some census information, and we figured out that at least sort of registering and filing their taxes as there were only about 300 maybe cartoonists or professional comic artists within Canada. Which is, on one hand, I think like, oh, wow, that's a decent number. But on the other hand, that's a very small number. There's definitely more of them in the U.S. And that could have changed now, too. That's kind of old information. But just to give you a window on, like, it's a small market trying to get attention to a small market. So a small collective of artists trying to get attention to a small market. It's very challenging. We've got several interesting local publishers. They tend to have shorter lifespans. Notably, there's a couple that have had really substantial lifespans so far. Drawn and Quarterly is kind of Canada's premier literary and basically kind of, I think, one of our largest publishers now at this point. Conundrum used to be Montreal based and is now based on the East Coast. They do a lot of amazing books. They've been sticking out for quite a while. And then we had Koyamada Press doing really interesting stuff, but they are recently sort of starting to fold their publishing operations. And Koyamada has still got a lot of involvement in the comics and arts community, and she's got other things on the go, and you should check that out. But it's a little sad to see her go. But I really like what she did, and I respected the kind of the keep them happy. Don't overstay your welcome kind of philosophical approach she had to what she was doing. Um, there are many others, and I'm probably not going to remember the names of, so I'm not going to really try to go further than that. But just to say, there's a few notable names, and we pay a lot of attention to them, and we try to pay attention to the more obscure ones. We just had an awards thing. So if you go to the website, you'll find a couple months ago there was the first Sequential Awards, and we named a whole bunch of cool things. I'll do a vodcast reading of our awards and profile of those creators, I think, via YouTube in the coming weeks. And where am I going with all this? I'm basically just telling you about the site, but I think I've kind of said enough. Yeah. So one thing I'll say up front at the end here is that we're probably not going to edit these too much. You'll get what you get. You get our rambles. It's something we like to do, but we almost all have other priorities. Sam and I are both artists and creators, and so we'll be wanting to talk freely and not wanting to have to pick through it later on and do a lot of editing. So mostly you're going to get raw conversations, and hopefully that's interesting to you. And then, in the comments, pitch us ideas and suggestions. I know that I definitely on my wish list, studio tours eventually, once we can start visiting people's studios again. Retailer tours, go visit comic shops with camera, shoot interviews, just sort of like good one-on-one casual interviews. I think primarily between creators is my bias. I like conversations between people who understand each other's work and can ask sort of really interesting, insightful questions. They don't have to be like bookish and nerdy and like, whoa, but if it comes from a kind of a strong position of awareness of how things work and an informed question, it's always really interesting, and it triggers interesting answers. And it tends to avoid that predictability of like, where do your ideas come from? And so yeah, if there's anything else other than that on my wish list, I'd be interested in hearing it mentioned in the comments. See you around the internets very soon. Ciao.